I'm John Travis on July 10th, 2025, in Charlottesville, Virginia, with my brother from another mother, Kent Peterson, who I'm going to interrogate about who he is and why. So, welcome, Kent.
Thank you. It's an honor to be interviewed by you, Jack.
So, rather than facing each other on a screen and appearing side by side in a video, we're actually sitting side by side so we can look at each other. Novel way of recording. So I want to start with, and I've been reading the draft of your biography, so I actually have an inside look at your inner workings in a lot more detail than we can go into today. But I'd like to begin to get the very basics of like who you are, where you grew up, what influenced you to become the person you became, and we'll start with your birth.
Well, I am a war baby. I was born at the Naval Hospital in Virginia, while my father was serving for 2 years in the Navy during World War II. And so I spent the first 2 years of life with my mother while my father was in South Africa. But after he returned, we moved back up to the New York area where he finished a residency in radiology and took his one and only job in his career in Louisville, Kentucky. So we moved from the Northeast to the Midwest, and so I'm a Midwesterner. My ancestors, though, came from Idaho, and my grandfather on my mother's side was a country horse and buggy doctor. He literally took his buggy out at night, and if people needed to see the doctor, they would put a sheet hanging up on the front of the door, and it would flap in the breeze, and it would wake up the horse or stop the horse, wake up my grandfather, and he would go in and do house calls. So I really did come from a medical background. My dad's father actually took a group of 200 Japanese migrants, laborers, into the remote area of Idaho and built a beet sugar processing factory in what was later named Sugar City, Idaho. So he grew up in a straw and mud hut, not far from where my mother's father was working in Blackfoot, Idaho. But they met on a blind date in Philadelphia, and they had a lovely romance. She was working for Good Housekeeping in New York and had to be single in order to keep her job, so they were secretly married. And so they had an interesting romance. But I grew up in the Midwest in Kentucky. My mother was a psychic, and she was a student of Edward Casey. She always knew and picked the Kentucky Derby winners, and all of her friends would bet, although she never did make a bet. So I grew up early on with an interest both in medicine, but also in the world of psychic reality and spiritual matters.
And I remember before cell phones gave it away, you could usually tell when I was calling you or someone else when you pick up the landline phone.
Whenever I hear a phone ringing, I always know who's calling. I don't know where it came from, but it persists to this day.
I didn't know it was that.
It's very high percentage.
Really? Huh.
But my training was traditional. I went through a conventional internal medicine training.
Well, let's get back to that later. I want to go back to your birth and a little more time with working up from day one. And so your mother was here somewhere in Virginia with you?
She was in the Norfolk area.
Uh-huh. And you had her all to yourself for 2 years, which is
right. I had what would be considered in some ways the best of all worlds. I was wanted, I was welcomed, I was loved, and I had my mother to myself. So, of course, that led to a very tense situation when my father returned when I was age 2 1/4. And I sort of said, "Who's this strange person?" And he came home expecting to be welcomed as the man of the house, but there was competition between my dad and me from my mother's love, her time, and her attention. So we replicated a classical Oedipal situation, and my dad and I had tension between us for most of my early life.
So he came back when you were still in Virginia, and
Right,
then you went to New York.
exactly.
Uh-huh. Oh, I want to back up a little bit, actually before your birth, when your mom and dad had the long distance relationship and then secretly got married. How long between when they got married and when you were born? What was the preconception and conception period like? If you
Well, my
know?
mother had had a dream of having two brown-eyed boys. And when she first became pregnant, my dad was in his residency program, and she knew that if she had a baby then, he would have to drop out and have to give up his lifelong dream. So she secretly had an abortion
Mm.
and did not tell him about it at the time. And then, when they were ready to have children, she had two miscarriages. So by the time I was born in April of 1943, my arrival was a very, very much wanted event. And in terms of my inner psychic workings, I really had the feeling at some of my deepest spiritual moments that I had been aborted and that I had persisted because I wanted so badly to be born to my mother and to come into this family during this time.
And for her to get an abortion on her own in what, the late 30s or early 40s, that was a monumental task in itself. So,
It was. She had been dating another physician who later became one of the senior people at the National Institutes of Health. His name was Jack Masur, and she contacted him, and he arranged to have the abortion.
Yeah. And now, when did they actually get married? What was their date?
I think they got married in 1939.
Uh-huh. So it was about 3 years of.
So 4 years before I was actually born.
And the circumstances of your birth, it was normal, like probably drugged in the hospital and forceps out, or do you know?
Well, my mother was late in having the baby. They were threatening her with an induced labor, and she was up in the night before I was born, and she apparently made a mess in the bathroom and was on her hands and knees in the bathroom cleaning it up, and that's when she went into labor. So she went into labor, and I was born at, I think, 3:34 in the morning. But if she had not been in labor, they were going to induce labor. So she was fortunate in that I did have a natural vaginal birth. But she said that I was separated from her at birth and that she had to fight valiantly to be allowed to nurse me. She very much wanted to be a nursing mother, but she had to fight against the tradition because at that point that was not considered typical.
Yeah, my dad was giving women injections to dry their milk up, which was normal, to make it less uncomfortable from not nursing. That was, we were born the same year, so that was the pattern in Ohio anyway. So she got you out of the nursery and into her arms, or do you know that?
I was in her arms enough to be nursed, and Dad certainly supported the nursing, and he was there when I was first born.
Oh,
But he did not come. He did not make it to the hospital in time for my birth. So we had a few weeks together before he was stationed overseas.
okay. So what else in these first 2 years with your mother do you remember? I mean, you probably don't remember any of it directly, but feedback from her, or were there any other relatives, or was it just you and her?
My mother had a close friend at Good Housekeeping in New York who came down to Virginia and would visit her. So she was sort of like an aunt. and she was like an aunt for my whole life.
Hmm. Now, did she take a leave of absence to be in Virginia, or what was her relationship with?
I think that officially ended her time at Good
Uh-huh.
Housekeeping.
So she
But
was.
Alta, her friends, continued at housekeeping, later became the head of food services at Columbia University, and then later became the head of food services at Harvard University.
Uh-huh.
She was the one who said that the Harvard students love to eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches,
And did they give them to them?
and they gave them to them. There was worse nutrition possible, but that's what
Well,
the students were choosing.
yeah. So, was she living in an apartment or?
She was living in a small house in a place called Oakdale Farms that was within driving distance of the Portsmouth Naval Hospital where I was born.
Uh-huh. Now, was your dad in the Navy? Is that
In
why?
the Navy,
Oh,
yes,
okay.
he was a
Makes sense.
captain, and not a captain, but I guess a second lieutenant in the Navy.
Uh-huh. And any other things you know about from those 2 years before he returned?
Well, I know that they wrote each other letters daily. They had a deep
Oh,
love affair with each other. And since he could not tell her where he was stationed, they used letterhead that was a certain size. And they had a map that was exactly the same size. And whenever he was relocated, he would take a pin and he would puncture the letter. And
ah,
when she got a letter and there was a hole in it, she would hold it up to the map so she knew exactly where he was.
clever. Huh. And they worked that out before he left. I guess it
Obviously,
must have been a world
their secret code.
map. Wow. Quite some commitment. And do you know anything about the letters or what?
No,
Uh-huh. So when he came back, that's when you moved to New York, and where?
right. We lived in Brooklyn briefly, and then we took a small house in River Edge, New Jersey, right across the George Washington Bridge
Uh-huh.
from New York, so he could commute into his residency program. And when he finished that, my brother had been born 3 years later to the day. We were both conceived on the 4th of July, so we both started life with a bang. And we drove from New Jersey to Louisville, Kentucky, where my dad had his first job. So I was 4, my brother was 1, and that's when we became Midwesterners.
And was it just random that he wound up in Louisville, or was there a family tie? Or
No, he applied to work with a physician named Joseph C. Bell, who was a British doctor, British radiologist, who had his own firm and worked for Louisville Norton Hospital, Norton Infirmary. So he took a job working for Dr. Bell, and there was another doctor working with him named James Douglas. So it was Bell, Douglas, and Peterson.
uh-huh. So, what are your earliest memories in Louisville? And
I
notice I
think,
know how to
well,
pronounce Louisville because I had cousins from
you
Louisville.
do. That's good for you. Well,
Two syllable
my
word.
earliest memory was actually in New Jersey because we had a cat, and the cat would go out and pounce on various critters and bring them back to the back door. And then when my mother opened the door, the cat would release his prey and it would scamper around and he would chase it. And
In the house.
in the house or in the yard, but he was showing off his prey. So at one point, my mother rescued a bird, which was injured but not dead. She put it down the basement, and we cared for it. And the name of the bird was not very creative. It was called Tweety. And we would go to the top of the stairs. We would hold out our hand and say, "Here, Tweety, tweet, tweet," and the bird would fly onto our hands, and it would eat the food that we would have in our hands. So that's my earliest memory, was holding my hand out, saying Tweety, and having a little bird. So I was probably 3 years old when that happened.
So the bird recovered?
The bird did recover and was eventually released.
Ah, cool.
The other memory I have in New Jersey was that there was a pond across Kinderkamak Road from where we lived, and there were cattails that grew up with these long stalks and these beautiful, beautiful tip of a cattail. And I remember going to the pond, and we would hold on to the end of them, and they would sort of come apart, and the seeds would spread and blow in the wind. One day, walking back from that pool and from that pond, my friend and I were crossing across the road, and we made a run to go across the road, and I made it, and he did not. And he apparently was hit and killed by a car. So that was kind of a stirring and memorable event. I know I was kind of suddenly hovered on by a bunch of adults. I never saw my friend again, but I do have an early memory. So those are my two early memories
Mm-hmm.
when I was about three years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember the drive from New York to Louisville because my brother had poopy diapers, and I couldn't stand the smell of his poopy diapers. So that's another indelible imprint in my mind.
Yeah. And what are your earliest memories in Louisville? And where did you live? And
Well, we rented a small house next to a vacant lot, and I remember playing in the vacant lot, and loved being outdoors with nature. I think there was a young girl that I was playing with at one point, and she suggested that we play pull down pants. And I do remember that she was interested in my anatomy, and she didn't have something that I did, and I thought that was unusual. So that's another early memory that I've not written about in my biography. But I was an early member of the Pull Down Pants Club.
and just the idea of a vacant lot, that's a concept that's kind of gone with kids these days rarely even get to play out in nature or a highly controlled playground. But yeah, vacant lots were a common thing in our childhood.
Absolutely wonderful.
They're gone. Yeah, we play baseball across the street in a vacant lot where there's now a house in Bluffton, Ohio. So other early memories in Louisville.
I remember that my parents met another couple at a grocery store, and they sort of became our adoptive godparents. He was a surgeon named William Bizot, and later he was responsible for me getting into medical school at the University of Louisville. So the Petersons and the Bizots were close friends. They had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, and we had 2 children and later adopted a sister. So they had 3 children, we had 3 children, and he was my godfather, and I would call him Uncle Bill because I didn't have any other relatives that I knew.
Were they back in Idaho or didn't even have any?
My ancestors and relatives were in Idaho, but we did not talk much about them. My mother had been the oldest, the last child born in her family, and the first girl. So many of her brothers had died by the time I was born, and I only met 2 of her brothers. Well, I only met one of her brothers because they mostly had passed away. My father had a bunch of sisters and one brother, and they were Mormons. And because my father wanted us to avoid the proselytizing of the Mormons, he did not keep contact with his relatives, except for one sister who was a Baha'ist, and she was more open to him not being a Mormon, so she would visit us periodically. So I remember my aunt Zona and her husband Burnell.
No, I didn't know your sister was adopted, and how much younger, and how was that for you?
My brother was 3 years younger than me, and because my mother had had an abortion, she decided to do a payback, and so she adopted a child, and my sister Lynn was 3 years younger. So it was 9, 6, and 3. We were always a stair step in terms of age of children.
Was she 3 when she was adopted?
She was probably
younger?
6 weeks when she was adopted. She was not a healthy baby. She had ear infection. and she was very lean, and I think they had to put a tube down her stomach to give her nourishment because she had had a little bit of a failure to thrive.
They, what did they know the parents of her, or what was it?
They knew of the parents, but I don't think they knew the parents. But it was through an adoption agency in Louisville.
And how was that with her integrating in the family? And
well, my mother always called her Mama's chosen baby. So she always knew she was adopted. She knew that she was chosen. And of course, my brother Gary and I both loved having a little sister. So we adored her and really looked out for her. And we were good big brothers to her. We fought like cats and dogs with each other, my brother and me. But we were really good to my sister.
Oh, that's nice. And how did she adapt as being adopted?
She thrived. She was loved. She was cute. And I have pictures of her in her Easter outfits with a white dress with our neighbor's roses. And she just was a picture of beauty.
The white gloves too, probably.
I don't remember that. But I know she got a bunny for Easter once. So she loved her bunny. In fact, she loved it so much, I think she killed it.
Oh, no.
Smothering a bunny.
Oh.
But we had a happy childhood with the three of us kids. And when I was about 5, we moved to our first house that we actually owned and the house that I grew up in on Dorothy Avenue. So it was in the highlands of Louisville. And it was a safe neighborhood. We went out onto the streets, played in the vacant lot. There's also a vacant lot near my second house. And I loved playing. We built a fort there, and I knew the neighbors. And when I was a teenager, I cut their grass, made money doing household chores. And the neighbors often had me house sit when they were traveling, and I would feed their pets. So they'd trust me by giving me a key to their house. I would walk over, go into their house, feed the pets, look at their house, imagine what their lives were like, and felt really happy that I was trusted enough that I could go into people's houses.
Now, when you mentioned the fort, it brought back memories of we used to get casket crates from the funeral home and make houses out of that. I don't know if we called them forts, but they were clubhouses. Did you have access to those, or what did you make your forts
I think
out of?
we did have access to large cardboard boxes, so we made great forts until a heavy rain took it away, and we had to continually rebuild our forts.
Our casket crates were actually wood, so they'd hold up in the rain. They leaked, but
I remember a hawthorn tree in the backyard of Dorothy Avenue, and we used to go out there, and we were constantly intrigued by these very, very sharp, long thorns. So we were lured to them, but also afraid of them. And we had a garage in the backyard, and sometimes my brother and I would go out and get pieces of mud from the side of the garage and walk across the yard, and we would throw mud or throw balls at the garage, and we were fighting the Japs. That's what we thought we were doing. We were fighting the Japs by hurling sticks and stones and mud balls at the garage. Don't know how the garage ever survived.
Well, now let's get to your schooling. You went through the usual grade school, junior high, and
right. I started first grade at a school with our house that we had rented, and we were learning our ABCs to be able to recognize them and print them. But when we moved, I was in the second grade, and the elementary school there was within walking distance of our house. So later I walked it from the second through the sixth grade. But the students in that class already were learning to do script. That is, to not just print block letters, but do script letters. And I didn't know how to do it. So I remember my experiences in school were a feeling that I was behind everybody, that I wasn't good enough or that I wasn't caught up. So I made it a very strong point to work diligently to learn how to print the letters and then do script. And between the second and the fifth grade, I worked hard to go from the bottom of the class to the middle of the class to the top of the class. And that was very important because I had no other authority figures other than my parents and maybe the Bizots and then my teachers. So my teachers played a very, very important role in my life.
Uh-huh.
And I loved my teachers. They were women. They were totally dedicated to our class. But in the third grade, we made costumes out of sheets that we made into Indian costumes. We brought the sheets. We cut them into capes that could go over our head. We made diagrams on them with crayon. We harvested walnuts from the walnut tree in the school. We boiled the walnuts till it made a dark brown paste, and then we put our sheets into it, and they came out brown with the colors of our symbols on crayons. We also did square dancing, and we were really, really good, and our parents made costumes, and we were very sophisticated third graders learning how to honor our partner, honor our corner, and do do-si-dos.
Do-si-dos, yeah.
Yeah. So it was a very fun and happy experience being in elementary school. I felt safe at home. I felt happy with a younger sister. I loved my teachers. I was getting to be a better student. And when I learned to read, all of a sudden the world opened up to me. And I remember reading books like Caddy Woodlawn about a girl who had two brothers. They were, of course, growing up in the country, and she wanted to play in the woods and jump in the lakes with her brothers, and her mother wanted her to stay home and help cook and make the beds and learn to be ladylike. She had no interest in that at all. She wanted to be a tomboy. So I remember supporting it in the third grade level, the belief that girls should be able to do whatever they wanted. They should not be forced into a artificial role of being a homemaker.
An early feminist.
I really did strongly in my heart believe that girls and women should have the freedom to choose.
And then on to high school, were you class president, class clown? What was high school like?
No, when I went from the sixth grade elementary school to a middle school in the seventh grade, all of a sudden we didn't have the same teacher, but we went from class to class to class. So it was a shock in terms of the schedule. And I did very well, and my parents at that point were recognizing I had some academic intelligence. So in the eighth grade, they arranged for me to transfer to a private country day school. So this was a private paid education school. And of course, I joined a bunch of eighth graders that had gone through elementary school together. They were a tightly woven bunch, and I was the newcomer, and they definitely made me pay the price of entry. They picked on me, they bullied me, and it was the Eisenhower election campaign, and we had campaign stickers, buttons that we would put on our shirts. And when our classes would break and we would stand up to change periods, they would take their stickers out and they would stick me in my butt and in my back of my leg and in my arm. And I would come home with puncture wounds, and I felt just terribly bullied. So I did not like my year in country day school. We played football there, and we had football outfits that we could have to put all that equipment on. And once we were on the football field, it was free game. Anybody could tackle somebody, punch somebody, push their head in the ground. And again, I was bullied. So after a year of football, I said, I'm never going to play football again. And I instead chose individual sports like swimming and tennis.
Mm-hmm.
So after the eighth grade, I vowed I would not go back. My parents were perplexed as to what to do because I'd already had a lot of advanced subjects like Latin and biology. And so I ended up skipping the ninth grade in order to come back into public school. So I was not a class president, but I was basically a year ahead of myself. I was younger than my peers. when they turned 16 and they could drive in the 10th grade, I was still unable to drive because I was only 15. So I felt like I was behind again, just like I'd been behind in elementary school. In some ways, I felt a little bit behind, but this time socially. And I had a friend in the swimming team who taught me how to make friends. His name was Steve Bader. He had a Vespa motor scooter.
Oh, yeah.
And I would get on his scooter behind him, hold onto his waist. We would drive down Broadway to the YMCA at, I think, 4th and Broadway. And we would go to swimming practice. And I really loved having a friend. He taught me how to talk with girls, taught me how to be a friend. And I truly loved my first best friend, who was Steve Bader. But again, I loved my teachers. I knew how to relate to authority figures because I didn't have any older siblings. And I did well in school, so I became a National Merit finalist. And I could have probably been a National Merit Scholar, but my father refused to fill in the financial application form, said he had saved money for me, he would pay for my education, and he did not need to submit any forms about his personal finances. So 2 of my classmates did become National Merit Scholars. They both went to Harvard, and I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
And how'd you happen to pick UNC?
My pediatrician went to school there.
Uh-huh.
So if he liked North Carolina and he thought it was a good university, why not go there?
Uh-huh. And how was that for you?
I was inspired to be in college. I was younger than my classmates, but I really loved my teachers. In the first week of college, there was a lecture about the benefits of a liberal education. And I learned about the concept of lifelong learning. And it deeply inspired me. You know, the teacher who gave the lecture said, take the introductory courses in as many different fields as you can, because you'll be opening a door to lifelong learning. So if you take a course in botany, you'll be interested in plants for the rest of your life. If you take one in zoology, you'll be interested in animals and critters. If you take one in public speaking, you'll be interested in communication and public speaking.
They had courses in public speaking?
They did. I took a senior course in public speaking, a very, very wonderful course. We studied the greatest speeches in history, and we would listen to recordings of them, and we would analyze the way in which they were created.
Interesting. And then at what point did you decide to go in medicine and that direction?
Well, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. My dad was a doctor. My grandfather had been a doctor, and my parents' friends were doctors, so I felt comfortable in medicine. But I think I basically went through college looking for anything else that I could think of that I would rather do more than medicine. And I was collecting butterflies and moths at one point, so I thought of myself as an emerging lepidopterist. I was interested in political science, particularly after the Cuban Missile Crisis, but I wasn't a very good writer. It was hard for me to write a long essay, but I was very good at math and science. So being interested in people and being good at math and science, it made sense that I really could go into medicine. So I was not a pre-med major. I was a chemistry and philosophy major, but I had the qualifying courses. So after college, I was accepted into medical school.
And that was back in Louisville.
Right. I was applying to the University of Pennsylvania, where my father had gone to medical school, but my mother developed breast cancer, and we were horrified, and I was afraid that I would lose her. So Bill Bezeau, my uncle, arranged for them to create a spot in the medical school in Louisville, and I became a freshman there. I was able to live at home, be with my family, develop a new, different relationship with my father and my mother. But then after 2 years, the dean at the school said, Kent, you have a certain amount of greatness to you. I don't think you belong here in Louisville. I think you should go to one of the finest Ivy League schools. So he personally arranged for me to transfer to Penn. So I did go to the school that my father graduated from. So I transferred in the third year.
And your mother's breast cancer, she didn't die.
My dad was a radiologist, and after Bill Bizot, our godfather, did the radical mastectomy on my father chose to give her radiation therapy. He said he believed that it might be helpful in preventing a recurrence. So he gave her, before it was conventional, radiation therapy, and she had a remission, and she did not have breast cancer, and so she was healthy and well.
Uh-huh.
Later, when she was in her 60s, interestingly, she had a recurrence of breast cancer, but it was in the breast wall. It never spread to the rest of her body.
Huh.
So my father, being an innovator, probably saved her life.
I hadn't realized that radiation treatment was that new. So he was a pioneer in that.
And my mother, after her mastectomy, helped to start a new program called Reach to Recovery, where women who had just had their breasts removed would be visited by a woman to their hospital room, and the woman would say, "I'm like you, I've lost a breast, and let me show you how I've recovered." And she'd unbutton her blouse, show her wounds, and say, "You need to recover. And to do that, you need to put your hands on the wall, and you need to go up the wall so that you can stretch your tendons and have full range of motion." And it was called Reach to Recovery. So she got an award from the American Cancer
And
Society.
she thought that up? Your mother thought that up?
She was, I don't know that it was her idea, but she was a pioneer in it.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
My brother also had lazy eye, and she was one of the volunteers who got in her car and went to eastern Kentucky and screened hundreds and hundreds of people, young students just entering school, for lazy eye, that is amblyopia exanopsia, so that if they had an eye covered, they would learn how to use their lazy eye and they would end up without a wandering eye. So she was a very active volunteer and quite active in civic affairs.
And did your brother...
He recovered from his lazy eye,
Uh-huh.
but he wore glasses, and I did not.
And are you both brown-eyed? Did she get that wish?
My mother got her 2 brown-eyed boys,
So,
and she loved us dearly.
uh-huh. So what was big change from Louisville to Philadelphia? And
Well, first I went from Louisville to Chapel Hill,
right.
and there I made my first friends apart from Steve Bader. It was mostly a men's campus because there was a separate women's campus 100 miles away in Greensboro. So there were far more men than women, like a 6 to 7 to 1 ratio. So I had a lot of male friends, a few women friends, and I enjoyed my time in Chapel Hill. Then I came back to Louisville for 2 years of medical school, then on to Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm. And what was Philadelphia like?
Well, it was a new city, but I got an apartment. I met my new transfer classmates because a number of medical schools were only 2-year medical schools. So I had about 8 of us that came 10 days early, and we became a band of 10,
Mm-hmm.
and we were buddied up with each other, and I'm still close friends with many of those people. Frank Vasey was, for example, came from the University of Iowa, and he and I are still buddies.
Mm.
He's a rheumatologist.
But that's not a 2-year school, though. He just transferred. Like Louisville wasn't 2 years. It was, he decided to.
I'm not sure.
Move up to big-
I'm not sure why he made the transfer,
Uh-huh.
but there were a group of us that transferred. But we were well accepted. The students at Penn were all brilliant students, many of them interested in research. But of course, we didn't have a lot of classes together. We
Right,
were
you'd be
scattered out in
yeah.
rotations, so we only saw each other maybe once or twice a week.
Mm-hmm.
But I did join the Good Time Charlies, which was a singing group and a barbershop quartet, and we sang a bunch of bawdy songs.
Body, as in B-A-W.
Oh, we gave new words to old tales. but we sang at lots of parties and concerts.
Relationships, girlfriends.
Oh my goodness, I had a steamy romance in high school, and I was so much in love that I really didn't want to go away to college. I wanted to stay home with my true love, but that was not possible because I needed to go off to college, and then I spent a summer in Columbia with an uncle working in an engineering project. So I ended up losing that relationship. I dated during medical school, and I sang with a motet group called the Louisville Motet Singers, and I was hot and heavy with one of the motet singers, Nancy Gudekunst. But again, when I transferred to Penn, our relationship ended, and she went back to her old boyfriend and married him.
Mm.
So I had a couple of wonderful girlfriends in Philadelphia, but the idea of marriage was beyond imagination when I was still a student.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to Madison, Wisconsin in 1968, however, I went to the Riviera of the Midwest, this beautiful town with 3 lakes surrounding us, Lake Mendota, Lake Monona, and I shared a house with 2 other interns, both of whom came from Philadelphia, Herb Benson and Herb Goodman and Frank Judson. The 3 of us shared a house, and we definitely were actively dating. One of the things I learned from the residents was when you're on a rotation and you're attracted to nurses and you're getting along well, do not date somebody while you're on that rotation. Wait till you're off of that rotation, working someplace else, and then it's okay to ask them out. So I took that advice, and it was good advice. But I was a single bachelor in Madison, Wisconsin in the 1960s, and it was the time of free love. And it was a wonderful time to be a single bachelor in a town of beautiful women.
And then is that where you met Barbara?
After many girlfriends, I finally met somebody that I was just intensely attracted to. She was a returned Peace Corps volunteer. We were both working for the same boss, the head of University Extension. He introduced us, and we decided to start dating. And I was a chaperone on the University of Wisconsin ski tours because they always wanted a chaperone, and they liked having a doctor as a chaperone. So I invited Barbara to go along with me. So we skied in Grindelwald, Switzerland, and we learned to eat off of the Swiss and the French menus, and we came back, and we definitely were in a big romance. And it was at that time that I was being about to be drafted by the military. I'd had a waiver from going in the military during medical school, but that was about to end. And so about the time that I entered into the military, Barbara and I had to decide whether once again we were going to separate and it was going to be another broken relationship, or whether we should go ahead and get what we called a hurry up marriage. And so we took a leap of faith. We did get married. We actually got married in her hometown of Philadelphia, but the Catholic Church did not permit outdoor weddings. So we actually imported a priest from Wisconsin who brought a cardboard box of Wisconsin sod from the Evergreen sod farm in Middleton, Wisconsin. And we stood on Wisconsin soil. We were married by a Wisconsin priest, and we had a Wisconsin wedding license, even though our wedding was in Philadelphia. So we were challenging authority, wanting to do things our way, and it was a wonderful, wonderful wedding.
Now, she was Catholic, and so
she came from a Catholic upbringing.
So that was okay to marry a. What were your?
I wasn't really a Gentile, but it was okay for her to marry me.
Well,
but the church would not allow a priest in Philadelphia to marry us, so we brought our own priest in.
and what was your?
I grew up Episcopal.
Episcopal, okay.
My father had been Mormon, but he had no religion. And so our next door neighbor was an Episcopalian, and he took us kids to church in Louisville. And he was a Curtis candy man. He literally had a truck in which he loaded his candy, and he went from store to store to store selling Curtis candy to stores. And we used to work in his garage helping him unpack boxes and put the candy on the racks of his truck, and he would pay us in candy. And he was an Episcopalian, so we went to church with Uncle Jack Morey. And he used to say, people would say, "How you doing, Jack?" He said, "I'm doing great. If I felt any better, I'd take the day off."
All right.
A very loving, warm, wonderful person.
Now, from Madison, where to next?
Well, I did end up going in the military. I taught at the university for a couple of years, an innovative course called Contemporary Issues in Healthcare, Social, Economic, and Political Issues in Healthcare Delivery. And this was a course which I designed to talk about all the things we never learned in medical school. You know, we learned good science, basic science, clinical sciences, but I didn't know where patients came from. I thought they came from an elevator. I literally thought that's where patients came from. So I got interested in the ecology of medical care, where patients came from. In Wisconsin, I had a big Wisconsin map, and whenever I saw a patient, I would find out the town that they came from, and I would stick a peg in the map so that I knew all the different towns in Wisconsin where my patients came from. I learned that a lot of them came from dairy farms, and not surprisingly, they were dying of heart attacks. Their 6 or 8 eggs a day and their whole milk that they drank was contributing to heart disease.
Except that theory has been disproven. So
well, that was my experience. But anyway,
there might have been something else going on. This is early functional medicine of looking at the environment, of what your environment is creating, which we were not taught of iota of in medical training.
Right, we didn't learn any of it, and I was fascinated to find. You know, I took locum tenens in Wisconsin. I would go out to a doctor's house. I would live in his or her house, drive their car to their office where there was their staff and their patients, and I would spell them for a week so that they could go to one of their children's graduations or take a rare vacation. So I got to look at the practice of family medicine in rural Wisconsin right after my internship. And I was fascinated to see the different ways that medicine was practiced, so different than what we were taught in an academic medical center.
For sure. And where's the military fit into this?
So finally, I did have to leave Madison. I went into the military. I got an assignment in the Surgeon General's office in Washington, and I was assigned to work with a project called the AMOS Project, the Automated Military Outpatient System. We were basically an R&D project at a hospital at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and we were given the challenge of dealing with waiting times of 2 to 3 to 4 hours. People would come to the hospital, they'd wait in a large auditorium, and they'd wait 2 or 3 or 4 hours to be seen in their medical clinic. And we were told, reduce waiting times, solve the problem. So we developed a whole bunch of innovative schemes. The first one was that we developed a process that we called triage. A Red Cross volunteer would ask each person, why are you here? What is your chief complaint? You know, if you have a fever, how high a fever? How long have you been sick? They would ask just a few key questions, and based on that, the Red Cross volunteer would decide which category they would go into. Interestingly, the largest number of people waiting for hours came to get free prescription refills. So we set up a prescription refill desk, and someone staffed the desk, and we took care of 30% of all the people just by having them go directly to get a prescription refill.
Oh, that's...
A lot of people came with colds and sore throats and minor illnesses, the flu. So we had a minor illness clinic. and it was staffed by corpsmen, a corps woman, a corps man, who had some training but was under the supervision of a physician. But 2 or 3 corpsmen could be seeing people with only one physician overseeing the 3 or 4 of them. So again, we could take another.
And you instituted that. It wasn't already.
We invented that.
Uh-huh.
We literally developed the curriculum for the training of the corpsmen. So I was already teaching at the University of Wisconsin, and my background as a teacher clicked in, and I developed the training program for the corpsmen. We also had a training program for nurse practitioners. We had nurses, and we trained them to take care of people with chronic illnesses, high blood pressure, obstructive lung disease, diabetes, things that required multiple visits. And because the nurses were better educated and also better generally at instructing people, we had them seeing the people with chronic illnesses.
Better than doctors or better than the corpsmen?
Better than corpsmen.
Uh-huh.
And so we had 30 or 40% of people with minor illnesses, 30% getting prescription refills, another 15 or 20% who were having chronic illnesses. And that meant that the general medical officers in the general medical clinic appropriately saw about 15% of the people. And the ones that had serious problems, we refer them off to the emergency room. So this was a pilot test. We actually used computers to be able to support us, and the Red Cross volunteers would type in the answers to questions. We had the computers hooked up to MIT Promise Laboratory, and the speed of transmission was so slow that we could literally look at every letter as it was coming back from MIT to give us instructions as to the next question.
Well, Promise, isn't that Larry Weed's problem-oriented medical record?
I learned the problem-oriented medical record, but there was a Promise Laboratory at MIT.
Oh, that's what's ringing it, because I was using computers, the Harvard time-sharing system around the same time, but computers in those days were not something that sat on your desk. It was a teletype or really crude.
We had a keyboard and a small monitor, and literally we would see the word by word appear letter by letter.
And we didn't even have monitors. It was teletype. It would type it on the yellow paper. And so here you're now really moving in the area where our careers intersected. I'm coming at called wellness, but you're coming from within the traditional medical model and breaking out of the constraints that have a lot of impact on patients that you could call wellness, of getting them out of the sick care trap. So ultimately we wound up meeting in 78, but bring us up to there.
At that time I had finished my job with the Amos Project. I'd been assigned to another assignment at Fort Belvoir, working for the Chief of the Corps of Engineers as a human reliability officer for the world's first functional nuclear power plant. The Army had been challenged to develop land-based nuclear power plants, and we had a power plant in Antarctica, we had one in Alaska, we had one in Greenland, we had one in Fort Belvoir, and that was a training center. And so anybody who worked in the control room of a nuclear power plant needed to be very carefully monitored so that they would not have a mishap and create a nuclear disaster. So if you had money problems, if you had marital problems, if you had health problems, if you had problems with your boss, they had to be sent to the medical officer who did a human reliability assessment. So we also did drug testing for people, one of the various earliest forms of chemical drug testing, doing urine drug testing. So I had that experience, which got me interested more in the workplace as opposed to the healthcare delivery system. And from there, I was invited to have an opportunity to work in the White House, dealing with healthcare cost containment. And I got very interested in executive health. How do people at the highest level of government function at the highest capacity? So while you were beginning to get into wellness, I was very interested in executive health. And I think those are the places where our interests began to get closer and
Mm-hmm.
closer until we actually met at that conference that Effie Poi Yu Chow sponsored. That was the second East West Holistic Health Conference. At that point, I had just gotten out of my military service and I was taking a job at the American College of Preventive Medicine. I was their executive vice president, and we were asked to co sponsor Effie's conference for continuing medical education credit. And I said, sure. Holistic health, that sounds very relevant to preventive medicine, keeping healthy people healthy. So, yes, I'll co sponsor it and I'll attend the conference. And it was at that conference that I saw on the program this fellow talking about something called, was it high level wellness at that point?
Oh, yeah, that was Dunn's term that I think I used.
I don't know what the title of your workshop
Yeah,
was, but I took your workshop in an afternoon, and I remember being just fascinated by what you were talking about. You know,
that was back when I was using two slide
you
projectors,
had
and
two slide projectors going back and forth, and I came up to the speaker's table at the end just to introduce myself, and you offered to loan me your 3-ring binder, which had a draft manuscript of what you were teaching that I think you were calling the Wellness Workbook.
it was the original wellness workbook.
So it was a
in
three-ring binder,
Yeah,
and I took it home and I looked at it for 2 days, and then I gave it back to you, and we exchanged contact information, and from that moment on, we were friends.
yeah, and I want to back up that. How did Effie? Did she personally? Because I interviewed Effie 6 days before she died, and then I got copies of the programs for the first conference was actually in San Francisco,
Exactly.
and I presented at that, but I don't remember that one at all. I just remember the one in D.C. So, how did she connect with you?
Someone had asked us to if we could provide continuing medical education credit, so doctors could take the conference,
Uh-huh.
could go to the conference and get CME credits. I don't remember who asked me.
Uh-huh.
It
So,
clearly wasn't you because I didn't know you.
yeah, well, it was. I
I
just
think
wondered
it,
if it was Effie herself or what kind of staff she had at that point. But
but I did meet her. She and I did meet
uh-huh.
personally. We had a number of personal meetings to sort of help plan and handle the logistics.
Uh-huh.
And it was held off of DuPont Circle in Washington D.C.
It was up near the zoo, as I
Yeah,
remember.
near the
Yeah.
zoo.
And then the other weird thing we just learned a year or so ago is that Suzanne Arms was at that conference, who we encountered like 20 years later.
Oh my gosh, I did not know that, Jack.
Oh, I thought
No, she was at Effie's conference.
I thought it was a CCC call that you were on when we found that out. I was talking about Effie, and Suzanne said, "Oh, I was there."
Amazing. Well,
Yeah.
the other thing is that I met up at that conference with a medical school classmate that I'd lost touch
Oh,
with,
Marty, yes.
Marty Albert. He had graduated from medical school. We were very close friends in medical school. We drove after medical school to Louisville, Kentucky together, uh, where he visited my family. And then he went down to the AAA to get a triptych to drive all the way to California. He met a woman at the AAA, and she decided to go to California with him.
Barbara?
And he rented a car, and the two of them headed off from Louisville.
Oh,
He and I were corresponding for several years after. It was not Barbara, long before Barbara.
oh,
And then he went to South America. He drove with his girlfriend, then Barbara, all the way down through Central America, all the way down to Peru. And at that point, we lost touch with each other, and I'd not heard from Marty in 3 or 4 years. Lo and behold, at the same conference where I met you, I got to reconnect with Marty, and it was like, oh my God,
huh.
reunion. And so you and Marty and I, all three met at that conference, later becoming the founders of the Metadocs group.
And also three of us founding the Alliance for Transforming the Lives of Children, although we didn't even know Suzanne was there.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
Well, this was back in the 70s.
Yep, it was. This sounds like Meaningful Coincidences, the author of whom the book lives here somewhere in Charlottesville, but we haven't been able to find him. But
Well, I was just totally turned on by what you were talking about in terms of wellness, because I was interested in executive health. How do you keep healthy people healthy? We talked about clinical preventive medicine as a way to screen people for early disease, but the idea of identifying risk factors before they got sick, and even more than risk factors, how do you prevent risk factors by keeping them healthy? You were the pioneer in just that area, and I was fascinated by it. So when I heard that you were offering a weekend workshop in Koinonia, I said, sure, I'll drive up from Washington. And I did. And I just loved the workshop that you
yeah.
and Joy and Barbara gave.
Well, backing up even before that, another area we intersected is that my job at the Public Health Service in Baltimore was running a multiphasic screening clinic, which at that point we didn't know if they were cost effective or not. I went out to Kaiser in Oakland, where Maury, what's his name, had the original one, and saw how they were doing it. I sat in the office that my advisor at Hopkins had a desk in this office for when he went out there, that also happened to be the founder of Kaiser's. He was an emeritus at that point, Sidney Garfield, and on his desk was How to Practice Prospective Medicine by Lewis Robbins.
Oh.
And whoa, what's that? And I was fascinated with this idea of calculating a person's risk of death. I come back to Baltimore and mention it to my boss, Dr. Shea, and he pulls out the proceedings of the fourth annual meeting of the society that was full of all these practical things that were going on, and he'd known all about this, hadn't mentioned it to me. So I wound up going out to be with Louis, and then for the third year of my residency at Hopkins, I had to produce a thesis. So we decided to computerize it because they were doing it with desk calculators and magic markers that people mailed in to Indianapolis. And so with the help of our programmer in machine language, we programmed it on these ancient CDC computers. And another area where we overlap, because you took it beyond that with...
Fascinating that we were following parallel tracks,
Yeah.
because Lewis Robbins was a member of the American College of Preventive Medicine, and he approached me and said, prospective medicine is the cutting edge of preventive medicine. I want you to come to our prospective medicine conferences. And I said, I'm kind of busy. I've got a lot of meetings to go to from a lot of different organizations. He said, well, why don't you come and we'll make you the keynote speaker. He was so subtle. He said, come to the conference and we'll have you be the last speaker on the last day, so you can sit there and listen to all the presentations. You can digest them and synthesize them and give kind of a summation.
Oh.
So he forced me to become a student of prospective medicine and flattered me by giving me this keynote job. And I ended up giving the keynote, I think, in 1979. So from that point on, I attended every prospective medicine conference. I gave presentations at every conference. We ended up getting a CDC grant to update the scientific underpinnings of the formulas for calculating risk. So I teamed up with Jim Bernstein and Axel Guest and the dean of a school of public health, and we created a research project to upgrade the scientific calculations of risk calculation. So I was doing that at the same time that you had already developed the first computerized version. Later, years later, when I started my own company, we, under contract with Upjohn Pharmaceuticals, developed the first computerized health risk appraisal on the internet. It was
just going back, we started using it in our outpatient, well, in our multiphasic screening clinic. And what I discovered is that you could scare people, but it didn't change behavior. That was the big finding for me. And I had my, this is my third year of the residency. I had 2 more years of payback with the public health service. So that's what led to what's underneath these high risk behaviors. And I stumbled on Dunn's book, High Level Wellness. Thought wellness was a silly word and would never catch on. But the mental, emotional, and spiritual components of his model really appealed to me. So that's when I started with the wellness inventory. I remember sitting in the one of the branches of the Baltimore Public Library that was nearby the hospital, and just writing on 3x5 cards these various questions of very non-medical nature, but lifestyle nature. And so we continued to do HRAs, as we called them in those days, health hazard, no, HHA was
He
originally.
called them health hazard appraisal, then they got called health risk appraisal, and I eventually called them health risk assessment.
Right. And they were useful for us anyway to see what was going on with the person. They weren't very useful to change behavior. They scared them, but it was the inventory that seemed to actually get to the lower levels of their motivation and the psychological problems that were leading to the high risk behaviors. So, I was doing this in 73 and 73, 74. So I guess we weren't at the same meeting in Indianapolis. 79, would that have been, where did you give your keynote?
It was at the St. Petersburg, Florida.
Oh, okay.
At the Pink Hotel, the giant Pink Hotel in St. Petersburg.
Interesting. They were originally in Indianapolis, and
right.
Then I ran into Louis. That's where I met Bill Hetler in San Francisco at the old Jack Tar.
And I met Bill Hitler in 1979 at that same conference.
Right, he was big into HRA at that point.
So I know we need to take a short break, and let us pick this up later.